Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining today. While we give people a minute or two to continue joining the webinar, I just want to take a moment to call out a few upcoming webinars we have through Engage. So coming up next, or on September 10th, is a TI Sheets training. Just a note to those of you who are waiting for the new TI Sheets integration into My House, that won't be coming until like December, January. So this TI Sheets training is really for anybody who wants to learn the existing TI Sheets system for getting their TIs ready for sales conference and launch. Then the next set of webinars that we have coming up are the first in the Copywriting for Publishers series. So we'll have a presentation on target consumers, followed by a workshop on target consumers as well. So those are a pair of webinars that we encourage you to attend to really get started digging into the various areas of TI Sheets that will help ultimately improve your copy. So thank you again for joining us for today's webinar from the Penguin Random House Education team. I'm Allie McKinney from the Engage team. We'll be monitoring your questions and comments throughout the session. So for this session, please do send any questions you have through the chat box. I'll be monitoring that, and if you can send it to all participants, that will be helpful since there are a couple moments where the team will be asking you for some participation. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Michael while Annabella sets up the PowerPoint.
Hi, greetings everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. Yes, I think everything seems fine. Great, well welcome. My name is Michael Gentile. I'm the VP of Education, Sales and Marketing here at Penguin Random House. On behalf of myself and the entire team, we welcome you to what's sure to be a very interesting presentation on the state of authentic texts in K-12. So when you think about the sort of books that you all publish and that PRH publishes, they're authentic books. They're trade fiction and nonfiction, they're memoir, and they're often ideal for the classroom. However, making that connection with educators and more importantly with district leaders is one of the main focus points for our team going forward. We have some exciting new products that you'll be previewed at the end of the presentation in terms of some new classroom library offerings, both print and digital. And we're excited to be able to use this presentation as a way to communicate to superintendents, principals, and district leaders about the importance of authentic text. This presentation is not about any specific product line in particular. It's not about often a lot of the promotions our team does. It's really specifically on the educational data and research that exists that supports the argument that education will benefit, students will benefit from interaction with authentic text. When you think about the past few months, whether it's been the pandemic, the sort of protests around racial inequity and anti-racism, our books fit squarely into that space to help address sort of the current events that students are navigating much more effectively than I would say a textbook can argue. So I invite you to sit back, relax, enjoy. There are some moments where we do ask for your engagement in the presentation. And I will say that this presentation is being rolled out to teachers and educators. We were supposed to deliver it in person at 2 events that were postponed. So those events will happen eventually, and we're also using virtual means to communicate this in the interim. So without further ado, I want to introduce 2 of my colleagues. The first is Travis Temple. He's our pre-K-12 sales director. And the other is Colin Rublinger. He's our elementary education marketing manager. They have brief bios for both who are included in the invite. So now I'm going to hand it over to those folks. Over to you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Michael. Welcome, everyone. As was mentioned, I'm going to be asking you at a couple points during the presentation to call out some things. And if you would just reply in the chat to all attendees, because I want to make sure that everybody's seeing what everyone is sharing. And was also mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to share those during the chat. And we've got some time to come back to those at the end. So Colin and I are really excited to be here to talk with all of you. But before we get started, we really want to acknowledge the extraordinary circumstances in which educators have been working. The efforts of the teaching community to adapt to structural changes that have been forced by the COVID crisis and to engage in meaningful conversations about racial inequity cannot be overstated. And we recognize that these are both challenges and opportunities for positive growth and lasting change. We hope you'll see that within this presentation are really important points to speak to these larger challenges, and that the goal of promoting student representation, engagement, and achievement is at the core of what we're discussing here today. And what we're going to discuss today is something we know is front and center in the hearts and minds of educators across the country, and that's reading and literacy. In this presentation, we're going to look at why developing a reading culture in pre-K-12 schools is so important and outline what an effective reading culture looks like at the school level, and then end with very clear steps on how district leaders can support it, and this is where you're going to see your books play a part.
So why develop and support a specific reading culture in schools? Because as you'll see, there are a few initiatives that are as easy to implement and as effective in increasing test scores and student achievement than creating and maintaining a reading culture. Some of you may be familiar with this term, some might have a different name for it, but don't worry about that, we're gonna go over it. Before we get into the what and how of reading culture, let's first look at the why. I'm sure we all saw the articles about literacy in the US, articles discussing the most recent release of the National Assessment of Educational Progress Scores, or NAEP scores. I like this Forbes headline because it reflects the thoughts we hear teachers expressing every day.
Sorry, thanks, Con. Was jumping back and forth, making sure you guys can respond. I know there's a little bit of issue with the all attendees option being grayed out. So if we could take a look at that while Colin and I are speaking, that'd be great, because we're going to come up on a point where we'd love for attendees to be able to respond. So attendees, they're going to look at that, and hopefully we'll have that solved.
Just to jump in on that, I think.
Oh yeah.
If everybody can just send to the host, presenter, and panelists, that will work as well. It looks like that feature is working for other people.
Okay. To be verbal about the things that we see coming in, to share with everyone what is being shared with us. Thank you. So as the articles that Colin was just talking about point out, and as you can see here in this data, national scores dropped significantly in both grades 4 and 8 from 2017 to 2019. And while you may think that a 2-point drop in 4th grade and a 4-point drop in 8th grade doesn't seem all that dramatic, it's really important to note that in this study's measure, a change of just 0.5 is actually considered significant. And while there's been some growth in grade 4 between the 90s and today, overall numbers you can see are relatively stagnant, and most recently now they're slipping. In fact, the National Center for Education Statistics Associate Commissioner Peggy Carr has gone so far as to say that, and I quote, "Over the past decade, there's been no progress in reading performance, and the lowest performing students are doing worse."
But we need to put these NAEP scores into context. Not only are scores stagnant, but reading skills are deficient. An alarming number of kids in the United States simply can't read very well. And NAEP data shows that 1/3 of all 4th graders can't read at grade level. And it doesn't get better as they move through to high school, where most students still aren't proficient by the time they leave. All of this, despite the proliferation of multi-million-dollar programs meant to improve reading and literacy, programs that don't always require or even address the kind of simple classroom and student-centered solutions that have been proven time and again to be most effective. And test scores are important, there's no doubt, but while they are important ways to measure the effectiveness of an existing program, they also point to an issue that is even more alarming, and that's the social, emotional costs associated with poor reading and literacy skills. A 2012 study by Morgan, Farkas, and Wu, published in the National Library of Medicine, indicated that poor readers in 3rd grade were more likely to consider themselves as angry, distractible, sad, lonely, and unpopular in 5th grade than those who had not been poor readers in 3rd grade. These results provide additional evidence that reading failure contributes to socio-emotional issues in young children, which is a top educator concern for students.
And it doesn't stop there either. Poor reading skills are not just impacting the socio-emotional conditions for younger students. ACT results show that scores across the country are continuing to decline, especially in English. The number of graduates meeting the required benchmarks in English was lower than it's been in 15 years. And this continual struggle is contributing to students' negative feelings about school, and they're disengaging when we need them to be more engaged than ever. These feelings lead to behavioral problems at every grade level, and it results in more student detentions and suspensions, higher absenteeism, the need for intensive interventions, and even at the upper level, higher dropout rates.
And we all know that COVID is affecting every aspect of education. And reading and literacy is no exception. While it may be years before comprehensive research shows the true impact, it's not a stretch to say it will only make the problems we're discussing today more pronounced. This Wall Street Journal article detailing the incredibly difficult decisions superintendents are facing highlights these very concerns.
And in addition, there was a new study published by the American Educational Research Association that was actually highlighted by district administration, which goes out to district administrators across the country, found that more than half of students experience learning loss every summer between grades 1 and 6. Now, we know about learning loss, but what they found is that these students lost an average of 39% of the learning they gained during the school year. Now, that study's author, Allison Atterbury, commented that, and I'm going to quote her here, the longer summer brought on by COVID-19 would allow this to happen to an even greater extent. And that summer learning loss is just one example of how the current crisis will likely exacerbate outcome inequality.
So how do we address the reading scores, literacy issues, and social-emotional impacts, while at the same time teaching students to analyze data and facts, think critically, solve problems, and work in teams to be productive members of society? I know it's a lot, but one of the most important solutions is thankfully much more manageable than you might think. And we mentioned at the top, and that's develop and support a reading culture.
So now it's time to look at what a reading culture looks like across that pre-K-12 span. And remember, all of this involves your books. So here's one of the points where I'd like to hear from you, the participants. So again, in the chat function, and I'll try to be vocal about what I see come in, I'd like you to respond to what you can, which I think is the panelists, and send us what you believe to be 1 to 2 characteristics of a reading culture in schools. Now, don't worry if you have a quote-unquote definition, just send out what comes to mind. And I'm going to wait a minute here for you, but just to the panelists, send us what you believe to be 1 to 2 characteristics of a reading culture in a school. Thank you, Derek. Access to books? Yes, 100%. Barb sent in children of immigrants where English is their second language. Absolutely. Elizabeth, reading groups, 100%.
One came in to me as the host, and it says safe, encouraging environment.
Yes, absolutely. You know, these are all, as you've just, yes, reading groups, and as you've just identified, these are all key factors as a true reading culture is signified by a number of indicators. The majority of those factors fit into these main components, and you're going to see some of the things that were just called out here. A shared mission, vision, and beliefs, and a common commitment to student success and improved outcomes. And then those break down further into things like community engagement and buy-in, common understandings and expectations, communications, and more. Now, a school's reading culture is further shaped by the selection and use of instructional materials, and this was called out, Derek mentioned this, you know, books, and how individual students' needs are addressed, the assessment of student progress, and then also how that information is used to continually strengthen the reading culture, how instructional time is used to support reading across the entire district, and then important in any lasting culture, and I think as in everyone in PRH Publisher Services knows, and as we've proven all together over the last month, how everyone, from administrators to faculty to students to parents to support staff, learn from and collaborate with one another.
Yeah, that collaboration is really, really important. And at this point, we've explored why schools need a reading culture and what it is. And now it's time to look at the how of creating and supporting it. A reading culture is created through powerful and purposeful collaboration, skilled teachers and leaders, independent reading built into all of the school's daily schedules, and the use of and access to high quality, authentic, and complex texts. We're talking about books. So today, we're going to focus in on these two last points: independent reading, high quality, authentic texts, as they are critical components for how schools develop their reading culture. And it's important to note here that we're talking about a very specific kind of text when we say authentic and complex texts.
So here once more, I'd like participants to join, via the chat field, and you can send them out to the panelists. I'd like you to share one text that had a significant impact on you as a student. And I'll give you a minute to think about it, but it can be anything that pops into your head. Just one text that had a significant impact on you as a student. Thank you, Kathleen Manzanar. Barb, Island of the Blue Dolphins. Derek, Where the Red Fern Grows. Sharon, S.E. Hinton. The Outsiders. We're hitting the big ones. Because of Winnie-Dixie, Bridge to Terabithia, Lord of the Flies. This is exactly what we're talking about. Those are the kinds of books that we're talking about. And notice I said text, so it could have been anything. It could have been your U.S. history textbook in high school, but no one called those out. What we're talking about are we're storytelling animals, and it's really baked into who we are. And so it's really only natural that the books that you just pointed out are the texts that have woven through our intellectual growth. So now if you're like me and you like a specific definition, I like the nonprofit group EL Education's definition. And that's a text that is, quote, a high quality, authentic piece of writing created for a real world audience, a beautifully crafted book. Now, as someone who spent over a decade in classrooms, and I still hear from students talking about the books that they read when they were in school, I can attest to the fact that authentic texts are key to maintaining student interest and engagement. And remember, engagement right now is a huge issue. Decades on, the texts that affected you most are still a part of your narrative. They formed a foundation for your continued lifelong learning, perhaps even why you're in the business you're in now. And it's exactly like the books you see here.
So we're going to take a moment. Oh, there you go.
Thank you.
All right. All those lovely books. Yeah, so we're gonna switch over to a video real quick to renowned professor of education, Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, talk about the importance of authentic, diverse text for students. I think Annabelle's going to try to switch it over to the video. Bear with us here.
You see anything? Oh wait, it's over
No.
here.
No.
No?
I think it's starting. Yep.
No audio.
I can hear it.
Oh, okay.
All right. Thank you, Annabella. And we're going to switch back to the, there we go. All right. Yeah, the sliding glass doors is really so important. And Dr. Bishop's words are more important than ever because student demographics are more diverse than ever. And this diversity will continue to grow in the coming years, both in our schools and across our nation, making the mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors Dr. Bishop discusses paramount to the fabric of students' intellectual and empathetic growth. Especially as author Jason Reynolds pointed out at a recent event hosted by Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center, the sliding glass doors that students can imaginatively walk through, and as Dr. Bishop states, become part of whatever world has been created and recreated by the author. So amongst the curriculum programs schools already have in place to address literacy issues, there is another initiative that requires just as much attention, if not more. And that's independent reading. The International Literacy Association, or ILA, recently did a survey of educational professionals on the best way to ensure students grow into strong readers. And while everything on this list is important, providing time for independent reading was the #1 strategy, polling at an impressive 40%.
And there's really good reason for this, because in their book, Disrupting Thinking, Why How We Read Matters, Dr. Kylene Beers and Dr. Robert Prost cite multiple studies spanning decades of research, showing reading as a direct contributor to building knowledge, improving achievement, increased motivation, increased vocabulary, improved writing, enhancing background knowledge, improving understanding of text structures, and particularly important given the socio-emotional challenges kids and young adults face, especially today, developing both empathy and personal identity. Now, that is a lot of benefit for a manageable change that's already identified by literacy leaders as the #1 strategy.
Yeah, I think Dr. Stephen Krashen sums it up beautifully here. The single factor most strongly associated with reading achievement, more than socioeconomic status or any instructional approach, is independent reading. I mean, think about that for a moment. The single factor most strongly associated with reading achievement. That is a pretty bold statement.
And this graphic is why. Take a look at the data highlighted by Beers and Probst and what happens when you add just 10 minutes of independent reading to a student's school day. Now, from the top down, you see gains. Your students with the highest level of exposure, the ones you're seeing up there at the top right of your screen, those reading 65 minutes a day outside of school and ranking in the 98th percentile, they see a 15% increase in word exposure with just those 10 minutes of independent classroom reading. And your students reading 20 minutes a day outside of school, their word exposure goes up 40 to 47%. And both of those are good. But look at what happens as we move towards the left, to your students that need the most significant increases in word exposure. You see this incremental growth become monumental. For those students who are reading less than 5 minutes a day outside of school, if you add just 10 minutes of independent reading into their classroom school day, you see their word exposure skyrocket. And that percentage is increased here and is highlighted here in orange. So if you look at the word exposure of students reading at the least outside of school, which is under just 2 minutes a day, it shoots up 556%. And that actually moves them into, and sometimes even above the 70th percentile for word exposure. Now, independent reading has to be built into school schedules. It's not simply the reading they do within the curriculum or in in ELA, and that's where you see independent reading most often. Because literacy is every teacher's responsibility. What it needs is a district-wide initiative that's supported by the schedule. And we all know why it has to be built into the schedule. If the reading doesn't happen at school, in whatever form school is taking, there's a high likelihood, especially for your students who need the most exposure, that it just won't happen. Now, there are plenty of strategies for incorporating this time into both distance, hybrid, and in-person learning. But the important point is it needs to be supported by the school schedules. And let me remind you again that we're only talking about 10 minutes. And what we're seeing here is a significant student gain in exchange for very small incremental change at the school level.
So continuing with the how of your reading culture, here are some educator-identified best practices for independent reading. one we'd like to focus your attention on right now is choice. We all know how important having choice is, how this creates engagement for ourselves, and what it does for students. So how do educators support choice and provide Dr. Bishop's mirror, windows, and sliding glass doors to students at every grade level from pre-K to 12? This is also not a very complex solution, and it's classroom libraries. Don't take our word for it. Here's another recent ILA survey. Teachers, administrators, literacy consultants, higher ed professionals will overwhelmingly agree that if you're going to strengthen any library, classroom libraries are the key to success. Classroom libraries are the other big part of the how in a reading culture and can be curated to support whatever curriculum a school is currently using or be the center of it. But you cannot have an effective reading culture or support the independent reading necessary for it without classroom libraries. The National Council of Teachers of English 2017 statement on classroom libraries reinforces this, stating they play a key role in providing access to books and promoting literacy. They have the potential to increase student motivation, engagement, and achievement, and help students become critical thinkers, analytical readers, and informed citizens. Students don't not only need time to read, they need the selection and access to enable choice, fiction and nonfiction, classic and contemporary stories, stories that relate to what they're learning in their curriculum areas, as well as stories that give them the opportunity to branch out beyond that curriculum, to feed their curiosity. They need to be engaged. They need Dr. Bishop's mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors.
Now, independent reading supported by high quality, regularly curated, well-funded classroom libraries will have a positive impact on schools. Reading scores, student engagement, the socio-emotional health of students, and the associated issues we've outlined, all research-based, benefit from this.
And we'd be happy to dig more deeply into the why, the what, and the how of school reading culture with any of you who would like to do that. I'd like to point out that many of the concepts we've discussed regarding reading culture, independent reading, and classroom libraries can be found in our PRH Education white paper, The Power of Authentic Texts, which you can read on the elementary and secondary websites or via the bit.ly link. We'll also include a link to the white paper in our follow-up email to this presentation. We also welcome you to reach out with questions as you talk to agents, authors, publishers, and others about PRH Education's goal to inspire teaching and learning with outstanding books.
So, to support school reading and literacy initiatives, Penguin Random House Education has partnered with leading pre-K-12 educators to create both independent reading and instructional classroom libraries. These supplemental libraries can be used with any curriculum and support the use of authentic and inclusive text in any ELA block and across subject areas. They're fully flexible, and they can be added to existing classroom libraries to revitalize student reading choices, or they can be a strong foundation to build new reading cultures at schools.
And each of the libraries include a thorough educator guide, a handbook, with information on how to incorporate into a curriculum, teaching tips, rubrics, detailed book lists, reading level, genre, for easy classroom integration, and links to further educator and caregiver resources. We have already created libraries for grades 6, 7, and 8, and we plan to expand the offering to meet the needs of the entire pre-K-12 span.
So for now, we're going to leave you with this thought. You know, authentic texts have a lasting impact. It's an impact you've all felt. It's an impact you all recall. We just had you call the text out that mattered to you, and that's what you pulled up. That's the impact we want every student to experience, and that's lasting. Literacy isn't just a right of every student. Literacy is destiny. So thank you so much for your time today. We look forward to discussing this more with each and every one of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that presentation and to all the attendees. If you have any questions, feel free to send them in or send them to us afterwards, and we'll be happy to route them to the right place as well. Ruth, I will send your question over to the team for them to touch base with you after. Thanks. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.